And hello again, family, for Rainier Radio's Lyrically We Stand. I am Niela Maryam. I am your co-host for the night, and we have a couple of other special guests here tonight who will be co-hosting.
Yes. My name is Evan Martinez, co-founder and co-director of Freshest and I was invited here by the homie Niela, and so I am partaking in this amazing platform of Rainier Radio, and of course, Lyrically We Stand. So thank you.
Well, I just wandered in and someone handed me the microphone. I'm just kidding. I'm John. Y'all talking. I have a show on the radio called See I'm Here Now. We do issues and topics that are important to our community, but also that are in the news. Wrapping up my series on hate groups and hate crime. I've been going on domestic violence, and I'll continue to do shows like that because I've been given the license to do that because of Rainier Radio and great administration that we have here, Tony B, James Street, etc. So thank you very much for inviting me. I have no idea what to do in this, but I've always been interested because I've been telling everybody come on down on Wednesday, every other, first Wednesday or second Wednesday every month, or first Wednesday. Whatever. Well, I know it's all right. So thank you. Thank you much.
No problem. And for those listening, it is the third Wednesday of every month from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. So basically, this is Lyrically We Stand. So we just allow for people to talk about different topics. If you have a story you want to share, a testimony, something that's on your mind, a lesson you learned this week, whatever it is. That's pretty much what it's all about. So you are free to express vocally as much as you want.
Well, when we started before we got on here, I said, there's a long history amongst different cultures. Oral history is the first history that occurred in civilization. And oral history occurred in basically two civilizations, in Asia and in Africa. Africa being the seat of civilization in humankind, it started really in Africa, and as the migration of individuals from Africa moved around the world. I mean, people say, well, it is true. You look at all the fossils and all the artifacts and all the archaeological finds, you'll find that human beings originated from Africa. Now, I'm not going to get into that creationist versus evolutionist theory, but what we do know through physical anthropology, the hominids that were living in Africa are the forerunners of today's modern human beings. So I'm saying that to say this. The beginning of what we call spoken word and hip hop and all of that, because you're not singing per se, it's lyrical, but it has a background in music. It really started way back about almost 100 years ago during this generation of music called bebop. Bebop was an antithetical approach to music by black artists against white swing music, which was your standard 4/4 meter. And they said, well, we're going to do something different. We're going to be people, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, people like that, Kenny Dorn. We're talking about a handful of people who created a whole new wave and style of music, which is the forerunner of modern music, which is the forerunner of hip hop. Because out of that genre of music, they had what they call beat poets come up and talk about things, Ferlinghetti and people like that. And it was basically anti-establishment, counterculture, and behind it was a backdrop of bebop music, because bebop was not your standard modicum of music at the time. So I think that, and then when you see the progression of that, blues, R&B, and where, R&B, I asked the question to these young guys, and my son is a DJ, but he also knows some of the hip hop artists around town, and I know Dre's and people like that. And they were great. If it weren't for blues, if it weren't for gospel, if it weren't for jazz, would we had this thing called hip hop or rap? I don't know. To me though, because I'm an old timer, I say no. It's a progression of things, and I think any musician. If you've ever heard Gil Scott-Heron, have you the last one? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. And read some of the stuff by Don Lee and people like that, So, gosh, I'm getting off into that, and I'm taking up the time, but I just want to put that in. So this is really good because you're capturing actually what is a historical venue, what has always been part of the community, which has always been part of culture.
Yeah, definitely. Just seeing how music has changed, even in our lifetime, with hip hop, like we went from, the East Coast jazz, in the early 90s, with a Tribe Called Quest and so on and so forth. And then, everything moved out west with Dre and, with Pac and, Death Row and everything.
Snoop and all
of them. Shout out to Snoop for getting his star in the Walk of Fame.
Yeah,
That was pretty awesome.
Oh, yeah.
And he shouted out himself, which was the greatest speech ever. It's like, thank God for me. Like, I was like, this guy right here. It was awesome. But now you have, a new trend with, the trap and the mumble rappers and all these other things. And for me, it's like, okay, what makes this, why is everyone getting so upset and angry at it, even though it's not really for me, but I do understand the rebellious nature of the music because it always comes back from a rebel standpoint. You had, you got people who were back in the day, they were getting mad at Jimi Hendrix for, burning guitars and everything, but now we're like, man, this guy was just a legend and he's iconic, he does all these different things. But, you got parents who are like, don't listen to that Jimi Hendrix, it's all, that's the devil's music. And then even before then, you even have folks, especially like a lot of white kids, they would sneak to these black clubs. And
Elvis, they hated Elvis because he would gyrate his hips.
Right.
And the white parents said, that's too suggestive like black people do things. I'm saying that is a fact.
Right.
They banned Elvis. Many church groups said, we don't want him cavorting in front of our white daughters and nieces and etc.
Yeah, and then even when we were talking about even with the speakeasies and you mentioned about the early days of jazz and how a lot of white patrons used to sneak in to the black clubs and try to listen to what all those artists were doing. And so I think something that's so beautiful about music and we have a front row seat doing our open mics every first Fridays. At least it is just seeing the creativity. And I think the beauty of even doing something like this here is that it allows folks to really express themselves and really allow something that they created from their genuine space of, talent to really be heard. And I think where we're at right now, we are in a turning. It's been happening for a couple of years now through the advancement of social media and everything. But I think we are in an amazing time because we don't know where it's going, and now it's about all these record labels and all these major conglomerates that were once dominated this music industry, like all the rules are broken. Everything is not what it was, 15 years ago or 10 years ago, in fact. The rules have changed. And so I think seeing where these artists do go with, the advancement of social media, with the internet. Heck, we're live streaming right now. It's, we don't know where it goes, but I think that's the adventure and the wonder that we're in, and I think it's a beautiful thing.
Well, we do know it goes worldwide. I've even seen my show, it was translated in the text into the Cyrillic alphabet, which is Russian. I look at it because I've seen my name spelled. My name in Russian is Ivan, and I saw it spelled out, and it was our Rainier Avenue Radio. And then we got a letter and an email from a gentleman in Indonesia who was to our, we do Traffic Jam 4 to 6 every Monday through Friday, and he wrote, said, I love your music. And we're saying, from Indonesia? And it is true. The reach is very far. And you said something very interesting about, white music and all. I'm going to put in a plug. On Monday, I'm going to be doing a show about hate groups, and there are 15 identified record labels and hate groups that rap hate. I did research from the Southern Poverty Law Center. I don't want to talk about that, but it's almost like here we have come full circle. Now we have hate groups on doing rap and on the internet and doing. Literally.
Rap and hate.
Yeah, it is true. It's real interesting, and it's a lot of information from the Southern Poverty Law Center, but they are rap groups. They do the beat. And what's so interesting, James has said it. He said, here you have these hate groups who are basically racist, who despise African American and other races, but here they're appropriating the music and the genre. I mean, in other words, appropriation means taking it, stealing it, and using it. You know, that kind of thing.
Hate what they do and love what they do.
Well, they're making money too. I mean, they're making money. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
But they don't understand like the struggle and the history that came to create that.
Yeah.
And it comes from the hate in which they're spewing, you know, all of
Right, exactly.
all this black music, everything, even toward the spirituals. I mean, everything came from a place of darkness and despair, but yet we made beauty out of it.
Oppression, that's what it was. It came out of oppression.
And like from jazz to rock and roll to funk to R&B to hip hop, it was been taken, it has been spun around, and it was mass produced.
Yeah.
And those who created never had those licenses and never had that business savvy. So if you watch, Ray Charles, if you watch that, and he wanted, I think 7%, 70% or a certain percentage of the ownership to his thing. And I think that's something that's why I really appreciate even a lot of these little, the trap rappers, all these little, mumble rappers, because they saw what happened to a lot of these guys from the 90s and 2000s and how they were taken advantage of by the record label, and they were, they weren't, they got the short end of the stick way often than not. So I think the space and time that we're in is really trying to gain the knowledge because of the simple fact that a lot of these guys who are like, man, all they do is just get on the mic and do this and do that. Like, yeah, that's what it might seem like, but trust me, there's a business, there's branding, there's marketing that goes behind everything that you see. And it's not the artist that you should be like really concerned about. You should be concerned about who's actually pulling all these strings. Well, if you're bad at all the music that you hear on the radio and all this other stuff, know that who's pulling the strings to all the music, and understand that there are powers at B that control this thing. And so when you find platforms such as this that are against the rules and against the those things that limit and control what gets on and when and where, that's powerful. But your commercial radio and all these other things, like, they limit that because they have ties to each other, and they need to make sure that the bottom line, the green, is basically being passed amongst each other and not to those who are actually creating the content.
Well, I want to ask you a question too, but I did another show, and I did it about the record industry. A friend of mine who's a professional jazz musician.
Right.
And I did I look at there's 32 individuals who control the music industry. All of them are white. Yeah. There are two white women. But about 99.9% of the industries is dictated by white individuals. I'm not saying that's good or bad. And then when you look at the number of women, 2 out of how many? And then I look at the music scene, and you see a few women, but not. I mean, women are 52% of the population. Right. They have a great deal of buying power. So I mean, I'm saying, well, why aren't there more women in the music? Some of the greatest singers that we know. Yeah, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, etc. Go on and on and on. Billie Holiday, women. Women of color, especially. So,
I think that just to kind of chime in on what you guys are talking about, I think one of the biggest missing elements for artists. Yeah.
I think your microphone may be either turned off or dead.
Uh-oh.
There's a switch on it?
Let's see.
The switch line.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
Sweet. So if you're listening, this is Niela Maryam. I'm hosting the Rainier Avenue Radio Lyrically We Stand show. We are here every third Wednesday of the month from 7 to 8 p.m. So just to follow up with what we were just talking about, I think one of the main things that we need to maybe take more of a closer look at is that oftentimes artists are so focused on developing themselves as artists and developing their skills as artists that they're not always so comfortable with stretching themselves with the other side of learning the logistics to business management and development within their craft and within what they do. And so I think that that has a lot to do with why a lot of artists end up suffering in the long end, because they don't know how to really protect themselves or their intellectual property.
Right. And yeah, that pretty much goes into what the stuff I was stating earlier was just I think we're in the era of just awareness because of the history, because of what has happened in the past, and seeing that a lot of the artists were taken advantage of. They were, and that's why the story of even Prince is something that is something to really marvel at, because the simple fact that this man took, they didn't give him his name, so he was known as the symbol for the longest. And every time he did interviews, every time they were like Prince, he would not acknowledge them. He wouldn't acknowledge the interview person until they said, he would say, I am the symbol, or I am the artist formerly known as. And that's, you had to say the whole thing, and you couldn't, because he walked a fine line until they caved in and said, you know what, let's give this man his name, let's rewrite, let's do his contract, let's give this man everything, because he's going to just do whatever the heck he wants. And I think you need people like him, and you needed people like him. You needed people like Ray Charles that demanded the right, because of all this, especially the cultural appropriation and all these things that that everyone's just buying off the culture and buying off all this creativity. But one, they take the money and don't get back, and then two, they don't acknowledge where the history and the struggle has come from. So I'm very interested to find the link to what you were saying in terms of these hate groups and see what they do, and because I would like to see what they have to say and why they feel so compelled to rap about how they hate rap. I think that's
it's like James is saying, it's like a conundrum. Here they are rapping in a style that emulates African Americans whom they hate, and those styles we hate. Because I talked to James on the show, but that's interesting what you're talking about. And what you're talking about, I'm gonna get back to the fact that there's so few women. But one of the first guys that came out, and he bought a few radio stations, James Brown. And they asked James, well, why do you buy radio stations? He said one thing, I have records. Guess who's gonna play those records on those stations? Yeah, that makes sense. And when you look at it, there used to be years ago, there used to be this, there was a federal investigation. It was called payola. Certain record companies would pay certain radio stations to play their music. Mm-hmm. And it was a big, this is before you guys were born. I was a kid too, living in Chicago, and that scandal came out. But it's an industry practice that if I'm going to promote you, I'm going to grease the skids and buy it on airtime, because guess what? That's what happens. People hear it on the radio, in those days, radio, they go buy the record, right? And that's what was going. So that's it.
There's a funny story about that too. When Jay-Z, his first album, Reasonable Doubt, he felt like, man, I got a classic album. I think this is gonna blow up and all this stuff. And he wasn't getting enough spins. So he took a copy of Reasonable Doubt, and he had $900,000 cash. Don't ask me how he got the money. We all know the history of Jay-Z. $900,000 cash, and went to I think Hot 97 or a New York radio station, had a duffel bag, dropped it on the table, and had a copy of the CD and said, play my songs. And they had to look at him like, okay, sir, this is not how it works. But you know, but it's those types of things that, you know, there is an entity, and I'm not saying like Illuminati stuff, but there are powers that be that actually control this industry. And when you talk about, especially with women and in the music industry, I think one of the coolest stories I heard, and it came out of course after she passed, of Aretha Franklin. And Aretha Franklin was like, okay, I would get this woman is really amazing. Like, of course, we know because of her voice and all this, but she was really one of the first, especially women, to get, you know, she wanted her money. And so when Aretha Franklin, before she performed, she would be backstage and she would wait in her, she would be chilling in her waiting room or whatever, in her green room. And, you know, people were knocking on her door. Hey, you got 10 minutes. Hey, you got 5. Aretha wouldn't do nothing. And they were like, okay, why isn't she ready? They're like, oh, she's ready, but you guys haven't shown up with her money. Aretha Franklin would not perform unless she saw a briefcase full of money perform in front of her. And they were like, are you serious? Like, we got 5 minutes left. They're like, oh no, don't worry, she's good to go. She just needed to see her money. And she would hand it to her manager. She's like, is it good? And then it's like, yeah, it's good. She's like, all right, ready to go. Cue up the mic, good to go. Aretha would go out, do a show for 1 hour. But Aretha was not budging for like, you know, she'd be there for like an hour, hour and a half before the whole show. They didn't do jack squat. They didn't even warm up, nothing. And they were like, okay, why isn't she getting ready? They're like, oh, Aretha, she doesn't do that unless the money's in front of her. So, I mean, there are levels to this, and I think we don't hear enough of those stories, and I think they need to be heard more of because, like I said, these people, you know, the industry and these people in power, they will toy with you. Oh yeah. That's what you know, we've been doing open mics for the longest, and that's the first thing I try to tell, especially where, you know, you got young cats coming in and they just want to, you know, rap, focus on their music and all this stuff, and that's awesome. But the most important thing that we must always do is tell these kids the importance of knowing their power and knowing that they do have a say, they do have a right to demand and control, you know, their careers. And they have to take it in a level of seriousness. And if it's something that they want to do and want to be a part of course, it's open season. There's all the rules and everything's out the windows to where it was, you know, years ago. But just know that the sharks are still in the water. And because you don't see them doesn't mean that they're not there.
So true.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have another guest that might want to share something. So tell us your name and what you want to say. Okay, so hi, my name is Taylor Cornutisi, and I basically have 2 things to say. So one of them is a question about cultural appropriation. Mm-hmm. So when does the line cross from cultural appropriation to sensitivity? And then also I think in terms of like women in rap and like women in music, to me, like in my generation, I think what people focus on is like the flexing of it and like calling like women hoes and stuff like that. And I think like for the women artists that I really see, it's also calling like dudes like their sides and everything. And I don't think that everyone wants to be necessarily part of that culture. And then another question I had is like the mumble rapping, like I guess is culture. When do you think that culture started getting? When do you think that the people at the top started to realize that this is what people want to hear?
Yes, so in terms of like the sensitivity and when it becomes like cultural appropriation, I think what it becomes is that when the artists don't see their responsibility of themselves in that art. I think that when they are blinded by, you know, the glitz and glamour or the money, and they do not pay homage and respect to those beforehand, and they're just like, yo, I'm just about you. Like I've seen so many cats that just get on World Star and YouTube, like, man, I just get my money, you know, this and that, and it's like, yo, there are people who had to boycott the Grammys because they didn't respect this as an art form. And a lot of these guys, they don't understand that, you know, there was a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and sacrifice, even with lies, to get this music to where it is today. To know that hip hop globally has surpassed country music in terms of popularity and has been this universal, music. And for those who come in and don't respect and pay, homage to those who put the groundwork to make this multi-trillion-dollar industry, I think that's when, to me, it's like that's when it becomes like, yo, you're just using this as a platform or as something to just get by. You got a Post Malone did like a little interview a few months ago. He's like, man, he's like, yo, I would do something else, but he's like, rapping is just easy and all this other stuff. And I'm like, well, there's a level of privilege and there's a level of networking that, yeah, you must have done, but yeah, your privilege and everything got you to the level that you're in right now. And the fact that you're not paying respect and homage that to those that came before you, I think that's a level of disappropriation, and I think it's phony. And so I don't be like really on that respect factor when it comes to that. And then in terms of like you mentioned about women in hip hop and everything.
Before you move on to answering that part, I actually want to chime in just a little bit and just kind of give some of my own insight on it. First, I guess my question is, can you please just define really quickly for me, what do you mean by the difference between cultural appropriation and sensitivity?
So I guess I'll go back on Instagram, I see a lot of people calling out cultural appropriation and such, but like when it comes to dreads, but dreads aren't just for Black people because dreads are seen in like other cultures, like for like in Scotland and other things like that. And people I know often like to like call out cultural appropriation on things that only offends them and not everyone else. And I feel like that's kind of like the world we live in, where everyone is so sensitive that you can't really call anything. Like for me, for my school, I can't say anything about like if a person offends me, because then I'm called as being seen as homophobic or something like that. However, everyone else is allowed to say extremely racist things about like Black people and everything like that. So I think that's kind of where it gets into the sensitivity.
I think that just to reflect on that, I think that where the line gets drawn between cultural appropriation and sensitivity is, have you ever heard the saying, everybody loves to be Black until it's time to be Black? So I think that is where we're talking about that line. Because if you can benefit and profit off of my culture and off of the richness of my culture and the things that stem from my culture and from my ancestors, and despite the fact that we have been oppressed, and that a lot of those resources have been taken and used for the profit of other people's culture, and you don't have a respect for where that came from, and not only that, you do nothing to give back, to continue to give life to that culture that you got that from, that is where it becomes cultural appropriation and really a disrespect.
Right.
I think that if you are someone who appreciates where you learn these things from, so let me just address the dreadlocks thing for one prime example. One of the biggest reasons why locks are something that's well known around the entire world is because it started because of a movement. It started because of a movement that's centered in Africa, right? And the movement was to separate from colonial ways and to really honor ourselves as natural people. But there was still an honor in the sense that people understood that this represented the fact that we all, as a human race, come from Africa first. And we honor the fact that we are all brothers and sisters in that. And so around the world, more people began to adapt that and started to lock their hair as well, to show that uniting amongst the human race. Does that make sense? But if you, on the other hand, so I have a really great example. When I was growing up, I had friends who loved Black culture, but they were always making Black jokes. And they were always saying something about Black girls and how unattractive we are because of this or that, and our hair and our this and our that. But they're constantly listening to hip hop. They're constantly using our slurs and our words and our language. They may even have a couple of black friends, but even with those black friends, they didn't show the same amount of respect for the culture that they showed for their other friends' culture. And so I think that that is where, like I said, I think that's where it becomes cultural appropriation, and that is where you start to take from a culture versus appreciate what you've learned from that culture and make sure that you continue to make that full circle. Does that make sense? Okay, yes.
No, I totally agree with that. I was just coming from a standpoint of like just music and how sometimes when people are in that creative state of mind, it's easy to not know the history and all these other things, but when you are approached by it, by somebody from within the culture, and know that, like, you're literally taking advantage of what people have done for years and sacrificing all these other things. And somebody with a privilege, and you're just like, you just shrug it off, like, I don't know what you're talking about, and you don't acknowledge that. That's also, to me, a sign of you're a culture vulture, and you're just taking advantage of something that's made a lot of people wealthy and well off the last recent years. But there was sacrifice that needed to be made to create, something that you just walked in and picked up and just walked away, and it's like, man, and you're not even gonna say, like, shout outs to so, who, like, a lot of these guys, they make these beats, and like, man, if you trace back like where your beat was sampled from, you will know that it came from, this funk and this jazz era, that they took a little snippet and they looped it and created the beat that you're just like going on and on about. But it's kind of like, fam, that music's been here for 60, 70 years, and you don't even have the decency to pay respect and homage to that. Like, come on, like, that's what you become.
What's the craziest thing about that, though, Eddie, is that not only is that in the music industry, but it's in every other industry as well. Everything, literally to the cotton clothes on people's backs, okay, to vanilla, to peanuts, to, so we're talking agriculture, we're talking the sciences, even the sciences originated in Africa, and that's not respected, right? Like, a lot of the teachings and things that we learn in schools today actually rooted from knowledge that came from Africa, right? But those things are not respected and they're not acknowledged. And so that's where I think, well, let me tack back on that just a little bit, because I do want to say that there has been some forward movement in acknowledging where some of the rooted information comes from. And I do think that there is a push for that more so in modern times. However, historically, we've been socially conditioned to believe that we are inferior. We haven't been responsible for creating anything, when it's actually quite the opposite. This country would not be the economic powerhouse that it has been without us, period.
Yeah, and you were mentioning, you got questions?
So, like, with that idea, would you say that you align with, like, Malcolm X's belief, like the Black nationalist did?
That's an interesting question. Like, can you elaborate just a little bit?
Well, like, I understand what you're saying, that, like, without America, like, you need Black people for America to everything like that. And I guess there's another question, like, where does the line again draw from being a Black nationalist to having pride in your own culture?
Yeah. I think that the most important thing is that one thing that we do take from Malcolm X is learning the importance of group economics, because that has been our downfall. It's not about allying and working with other groups. It's not about doing business outside of your own culture or paying for business outside of your own culture. It's the fact that our dollars don't circulate within our communities enough for us to invest in our own best interest. So, for example, Jewish communities do it, right? There are Chinese communities that do it, and other Asian groups of people that do it. There are other groups within Africa, Latinx cultures. It's all over. But with a lot of African Americans, that system of group economics and money pulling is not something that has been happening. And we don't want to directly blame ourselves for the traumas and the things that have happened to us historically that have kept us from being able to do that. But we do have a responsibility today for those of us that are aware to start figuring out how to bring some of that healing and bring some of that full circle back into the community. Because it has been us that have built all of these different industries, yet we're not monetizing nor capitalizing off of them in any way. However, we are still serving them.
Then how do you capitalize off those industries in which there's not an education available? Or there's not a wide education available?
What makes you think that there's not education available for you?
I would say that there is education available, however, it is not demanded. I would not demanded, but it's not a core of it. Like in history, just an example, we learn about Black history every day, how for my history, even though it's American history, it's more of an extracurricular, or where I have to put my foot forward and say, I actually want a club for this, so why are we not learning about it? And why are we not learning about many Black musicians and everything? Why are we only learning about slavery and how it's compared to indentured servitude?
Did you want to speak on that? Or?
No, I was taught, I just had stories. I'll sign it out.
I will say because the schools aren't designed for that, and they never were. So these institutions were not designed for your best interest. The schools were designed to make you forget about you and make you become socially conditioned and mentally conditioned to serve the system that is currently living and existing and breathing, right? And so these institutions continue to exist because it allows for a space for the people to continue to be reconditioned to serve this system and keep it alive and well.
So how do you stop those institutions, and how do you create your own?
I don't think it's about stopping the institutions. I think it's just about creating your own.
But didn't you say stop, or at least, but didn't you not say stop? Or like, at least we need to.
I think what ends up happening is that we acknowledge that there is a system there and we know that it exists. But what ends up happening is that, and it happens in all different industries, right? Whether it's music, whether it's fashion, whatever it is that there are gatekeepers. And even though there might be resources to create and to align, different folks with different ideas and different things, but they all have the common goal of creating, a networking pool. For example, I don't know if you ever Black Wall Street, those Gainesville, like it got to the point where these were folks that were years removed from slavery, and they created microeconomies for themselves, bus system, healthcare, education, towns like it, where it was desolate, there was nothing there, but yet they created something. But racist white folks saw that, these folks created something out of nothing, and yet any way they try to stop it, through cutting off, resources and so on and so forth, it couldn't be stopped because they figured out, like, hey, our banking, everything is just streamlined across the board, and to the point where they had to go in military style and kill all of these folks. And so these are the extremes that they will not teach you in school. They will not tell you about it. And so for me, and I agree with what Niela said, it's like, the education and everything is there. It's just that we are taught and conditioned. Like there's no financial literacy in high school, right? I don't.
It's starting to.
It's starting.
It's not available. It's not available for my grades. Something available for like 9th and 10th grade.
You see, so it's things like that. That why aren't they teaching that? For folks who want to learn, and they should learn, because we've had generations and generations of folks that are in government programs, and families that have been in government programs for years, and so is because it's not taught. It's because, like what Niela said, they want you to be assimilated into a system that only benefits them. That's why when we were talking about earlier about, the geniuses like Prince and Ray Charles and even Aretha Franklin, like when these guys say something, that's a shock to the system because it's not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to speak out. You're not supposed to ask questions. You're just supposed to make these, your 10, 15 cents an album, count it and, hope that you go platinum, and go on a couple world tours and go off to the win. And the next artist is gonna go for that Sutter deal like the last artist before, and it's supposed to just keep going like that. So I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but that's what I feel when it comes to how the industry and how everything is today, is because they've done this throughout all different multiple platforms and different stages in the world and different places and industries. And that's how it's been.
So what would the modern Black Wall Street look like today without it being cut off, I guess?
How I would see it, I think how it can be done is, I don't know, I'm not really too familiar with cryptocurrency, but it seems like that might be an avenue to actually pull money together in the digital realm. And like I said, I'm not well versed in it. I was last year. I got some idea of it, how it works. Do not ask me. I'm not near the expert to ask, but last year I was fortunate enough to travel to South Africa, and that was like the biggest thing that that was a conversation, was like about this cryptocurrency, and I'm like, what is this cryptocurrency? I heard about it before I left, but then when I got there, I'm like, okay, this is something global. This must be something new. And I didn't do my homework enough to be like, okay, I'm about to either jump on or try to figure out what it's about. But I think that might be an avenue. I think creating platforms like Rainier Avenue Radio to actually share stories like this is very important. And doing meetups, as far as like to the magnitude of how Black Wall Street was in terms of towns and industries and businesses and all that, because that's a whole nother battle that needs to take place with gentrification and equality, through with jobs and all these other things. So that's a battle within itself. But in terms of the resources, I think it's just doing like these communal startups and seeing like what can we create, whether it's in the physical form, digital. It's just like, how can we bridge those gaps and try to create something within that realm. I think that's what we're.
For fighting the battles against like gentrification and such, how are you a bystander of the situation, or have you been trying to like?
Oh, every day, every day. I think no, I'm an art guy. I love music. I love bringing folks together, and so that's where I find the creativity for myself. It's just networking and pulling folks together to share ideas and things like that. So that's where my contribution to that is. What I want to do and where I want to expand is definitely try to understand how our struggles here, and then of course back on the continent. And my family's from Honduras, Central America, so I've had a little glimpse of how Black struggle is on a global scale. So my journey and my self-discovery is just to understand, okay, how can we be this global people and yet we face the same issues wherever we go, wherever we turn. And so my understanding is just to try to get folks to just really like wake up and try to understand that, yo, this is bigger than just what's happening in the CD. It's bigger than what's happening, in Seattle. This is something that happens with us in 2018 all around the world. So it's more questions than anything. And I know it's like, that's not an answer, but it's like, but it is more questions because I think what we have to do is try to understand, how can we be even on the global front, because there's even divisions amongst us as Black folks on a global scale in terms of like, oh well, they're African Americans, and there's all these other things that we need to break that conditioning down itself.
I think, Eddie, just to respond to what you're saying, I think that, and also to respond, tell me your name one more time.
Taylor Corey.
Taylor Corrine, okay. Just to also respond to you, Taylor.
Wilson, that's my first name.
Oh, Taylor Corrine. Oh, okay. Let me make sure I respect that. Taylor Corrine, okay. So there's two things. One, when we're talking about, you asked the question, what can we do economically to start recreating that Wall Street again? I think that it's very simple. It's to start figuring out what are your natural talents, what things are you talented at, and how can you monetize off of that and create multiple streams of income in your life. The next thing is help your friends do that too. You guys do that, and then you start a collective of investment together. So now, if it's nothing more than, hey, we've all been making a little bit of money, we're all gonna put $100 in a month, or maybe we're gonna put $10 in a week, and it's 10 of us, and we're each putting $10 in a week. At the end of the month, one of us gets that money. Now you're starting to work on group economics. So not only do you start and build your own businesses, but also make sure that you're buying from your own community more often than not. So now, if you really want to know, it's that simple. How do I get back to my roots? How do I get back to my own culture and honor that first and foremost so that it can have longevity?
Well, thanks for that, but my question was more so what would it look like, because I already know that the businesses that I started, my own businesses, I'm being heavily involved in my community, starting a nonprofit and such. But also, I guess, in terms of direct gentrification and everything, and just also, when I first say this, I notice a lot of the answers are based in selfishness, if that makes sense, because a lot of answers are I. So would you say that for the Black community it's more based in selfishness, and how do we go from selfishness to unity, or is unity a result of selfishness? Selfishness, if that makes sense.
I think that the selfishness is a result of scarcity. Anytime you take any group and you oppress them for a long period of time, you will start to see crimes, you will start to see selfishness, you will start to see the things that we see. Any oppressed group. So I think that scarcity is the reason. When we're talking about gentrification and you're asking, well, are you doing anything to advocate? Are you doing anything to kind of help fight against this gentrification? The thing is that it takes for each individual to do that self-work in order to even have the tools you need to have in the first place to support that. Because if I don't have the funding or whatever it needs that I need to have to support myself to even stay in this neighborhood, am I considered a bystander? You know what I mean? So it's like, I think that it's important to realize that the most important thing is that the more of us have financial management and financial literacy skills, the more of us that are learning how to not only sustain, but then to momentum build is how we're gonna fight gentrification. The truth of it is, we know already, gentrification happens every 40 years or so. So it's not a surprise at this point. So now we have the tools in this next generation to equip ourselves to make sure that no matter where we are, we have the tools and the support to sustain ourselves and our communities.
No, that's a very good point. Eddie, what you saw in South Africa, and you say you families from Central America, what's happening around the world is the people who have been working the land for years and years are stepping forward to say, hold on, we have ownership now. We have put in our blood, sweat, and tears intergenerationally, and we have a right to this land. That's happening in Central America, it's happening in South America, it's creating a lot of conflict. It's happening in Africa, it's happening in the United States. We call it gentrification. But Marcus Garvey, Louis Farrakhan, Malcolm X, you cannot expect to rise as a people unless you have ownership of the land.
That's it.
You control the land, you control. They burned down Tulsa's Black Wall Street. They burned Rosewood. Tulsa was an example, in Topeka, same thing. These were black owners and townships that raised the ire of the racist white folks because they weren't being successful. But what it was predicated on was the ownership of the land and being able to work that land. And this whole issue of gentrification is this new wave, this neo-colonial model. Now the colonialists don't live in another country, they live in their neighborhood. I mean, when times past, when you talk about colonialism, they lived across the sea. Now they're living here. I'm not trying to paint the folks that moved in here, but there is that issue of ownership. There is that issue of identification. If you own the land, I mean, and you talk about oppression, Fanon talks about it's a natural occurrence. When you oppress people to the point, they end up killing each other. They end up doing damage to each other. They end up believing that they are not any good. But that's what you have to do to oppress people, to keep them down. So, no, that's a good point when you talk about gentrification. It's this new wave now. It's a neo approach now. Because without land ownership, you have nothing. There's no entitlement. You can't even go to City Hall and raise heck if you don't own property. I mean, really, seriously. So anyways, I have to get that down. So, I hate to be running my mouth.
Oh, it's needed. And another thing to go off of, like, you asking, like, why is it the way it is? And, can we create something? And what happens is what you based on is a crab in the barrel mentality. Is that when one of us has that idea and wants to rise up and wants to create something, there's that one crab that reaches out, and that one crab almost free, and brings it back down with everybody else because it's maybe jealousy or whatever. And I'm not saying that happens all the time, but you see it a lot because of what Niela brought up was about, this scarcity. And like, oh, they can't be hidden, all these other things. So, and it's happening so often and not because of the conditions, because they put us, in these the projects in the hood and all these other, these places, and government cheeses, everything is boxed in, and so where we're at right now is, and that's why I was mentioning earlier about the beauty that we're in, is that we don't know like where exactly we can go with all the resources that are in our fingertips. People created the Black Lives Matter as a hashtag, and now it's become this this rally cry. And so there is power with the resources that we do have. It's just like, how do we own it? How do we create it? And so as I was like, I hate answering questions with more questions because it's like it's so tacky, but it's like, that doesn't help you, doesn't really get down to the root. But I think what Niela mentioned earlier is like the group economics, and that Black Wall Street and how how it looks now is like, what do you want it to be? And that's Gary was talking about our homegirl Gary. She brought us on the new Beyonce Jay-Z album, the Nice track, and he's like, what would you do if you couldn't fail? And that's a question that he asked. He's like, what would you do if you couldn't fail? And what you have to do is, like I said, like, create something for yourself. Start with self, knowing that, the energy, your capacity of what you can create. Bring others along that are like, treat my friendship and treat the things that I want to create as a million or heck $billion industry. And don't tamper with it. Don't make it about self. Make it about us. Like you said, I. It's like, what can we do? What can we create as a group? Like, I'll still have my thing going. I'll still be rocking with what I got going on, but I'm trying to make sure that everybody eats. So and if we're not all eating off, off our own creativity and our own genius, then what are you doing at the table?
Would you rather have equity or equality?
Equity.
Good.
Okay, I want to say, first and foremost, this conversation tonight was super powerful.
Needed.
Thank you so much. I hope you come back.
I'm like, oh, cut it out.
So, speaking of group economics, I gotta make this announcement because we're at the last minute. Josiah Jean-Pierre is here. He is an amazing, amazing author. He wrote his own book. It is called The Power of Your Words. So if you, so definitely check this out. Make sure you look him up. You can find out about this book. It is powerful. Josiah has done a lot of amazing things. And then we also have a book called The Epilogue by Jamar Smiley, and he is an amazing author as well, an amazing poet. So we are down to our last 30 seconds, but Josiah, where can we find you?
Amazon, Josiah Jean-Pierre, Barnes & Noble, Instagram, Brother Josiah's.
Okay, there we go. All right.
Good.